billions of new markets, people added, WTO movement, NAFTA. Now, trade is virtually stalled, at least from a WTO perspective. Chinese consumers, that's a popular one. But there's a lot of questions as to the people that survived the Cultural Revolution without a social safety net. Are they going to just whip out their credit cards and pick up where the 7% of U.S. consumption dropped off? But the future is, I do agree, you need stimulus, you need to weather these storms, but you have to have growth to get out of this eventually. You can't just rely, the Soviet Union would be doing quite well today if all you needed was government spending. We have to figure out some way that we're going to generate that engine of growth in the future. Trade breakdown, trade was set to decline for the first time last year. G20, we avoided a massive protectionist rush, but we had 85% of the G20 launch new protectionism after the G20 statements. And you've seen this, as I know many of you follow, kind of this tit for tat between the U.S. and China on tires and autos and other issues, and the question about where that's going. That's the view from the United States. If you look at all the countries that have FTAs that exclude us, you can see it's virtually the world. So, and if you look at it from any country, you probably see it similarly. And that's kind of a pictorial representation of spaghetti. And the trade is actually lost. And a world that was originally supposed to be the WTO having one set of standards that maybe regional groups is really kind of broken down. Campaign left questions about where the administration was going on trade. They made some very positive statements lately. Do you realize, and I know this from kind of being boots on the ground with Bob Zellick and the Trade Council and Ways and Means, constitutionally trade authority rests with Congress. So it's really hard to move anything if the Congress isn't engaged and brought onto the way forward. So it's going to be a big question with a lot of the official dynamics. We'll talk about that specifically. I think a lot of people have done great work on the economic benefits of the trade agreement. Troy, Ed, I know Tammy's in the audience, and they've done a lot of work. So I'll go quickly on that. The economic case is pretty clear. Where we're going. I think the strategic impacts could be far larger and harder to quantify. One of the things that I mentioned, Asia was advancing FTAs while U.S. stalled. That's Asian FTAs since '97. Now we're over 60, and that's a pretty limited version of the high standard ones that are reported to the WTO. Meanwhile, the United States has been stuck in two for about a half decade, in terms of implementing. With the last one being Australia 2004. So others are moving ahead without us, so not waiting for the United States to get its act together. Korea, this is again what I was saying, largest FTA partner since NAFTA. You can say that's total trade, GDP, and projected GDP. Again, far ahead of the ones that, it was mentioned, the smaller ones that we've had that were even difficulty across politically. And even before the EU FTA, the United States had fallen behind trade with Korea compared to Japan, China, and the EU. So, we're losing in one of the most dynamic economic markets in the world. One of the things I think is interesting, there's a lot of talk about, the BRIC economies, but again, the potential, we do have a lot of potential, but if you look at the combined BRIC compared to the EU and Korea FTA, it still dwarfs the BRIC. And, again, if alliances with the United States or others would again, far dwarf that. And that's true both in exchange rate or purchasing power parity. So, in terms of setting standards and IPR and things like that, there's still, for all the talk about the rising powers, there's still an incredible amount of market power among the countries that are, have a common vision. Roadblocks for KORUS, which is what we're here today, and it relates to some of these things. Is it on the trade agenda for 2010? There's a lot of other things, especially with the current political dynamics, working jobs, and how will trade translate into that agenda. I think you also look at the Supreme Court decision, which cleared the way for businesses to spend massive amounts on campaigns, but also cleared the way for unions potentially to spend massive amounts on campaigns. So I think people are still trying to figure out how that dynamic is going to play out in these elections, especially with primaries and then the generals. Key constituencies, autos and beef, obviously, a particular auto company in general, has come out against KORUS. Concerns, I think a lot of the concerns they have are historic on the TP issues, probably pre-Asian financial crisis, where there were some problems that happened, and whether the FTA, for all of its mechanisms to try to address these, speeding up the speed metal settlement process, consultations, can it effectively deal with these NTP issues that move so fast? Some parties are dug in, congressional leaders and others have stated their position that you're going to have to find ways around to get through this, politically, face saving and otherwise. Is there sufficient work underway to drive solutions? This is what, again, Ed was mentioning. I mean, some of these issues are going to take a lot of consultations, particularly with Congress, if they're going to move forward and lay the groundwork. And I know a lot of us are working kind of behind the scenes and otherwise to help try to facilitate that. And finally, one of the things that can drive these things, I think you may have seen this in TPP, with President Obama's trip to Asia, is there can be action-forcing events that kind of help drive things and push for deliverables if people are working the White House or State Department. Is there such a runway for takeoff? One scenario that I thought had probably the most probability was with the trips to APEC and the G20. After the midterm elections, would could be an ideal time for pushing this and looking forward. Now, under this is probably getting very technical, but under the Trade Promotion Authority, there are certain timelines and limits, and it looks like there may not be enough of a runway under the technical timeline if you can drop the bill after the elections and still get it through. If it was a couple weeks later, you could. That sort of require waiving the rules and maybe more difficult. It's still possible. But again, I think this is going to be, these meetings really focus the mind of a president or administration, and especially when they're going to have to show what the U.S. strategy is in Asia this fall. Again, political context domestically, as Troy mentioned, U.S. deficit surging toward levels not seen since World War II. Unlike Japan and others, which you put in personal debt and corporate debt, we're at 350% of GDP. So some of those, and again, whether that is a necessary investment, a lot of it depends on what the return is going to be. Are we building infrastructure? Are we doing things that are going to go forward? And as many people have mentioned, trade is a free stimulus. If it's sold the right way, it can be a way of promoting stimulus without adding to the debt. Whether that argument is going to be sold or forcefully made is a big question. A bigger question, again, I think this was some of the lessons of the Great Depression that get missed, is as you have this economic stagnation, do people turn inwards and focus more on their own issues, and will it cause the United States to retreat from the world? Most important problem, international issues get 1 to 2%. Economy and jobs, 47%. You got health care and budget deficit, you're over 60%. So how much is the United States going to be worried about these issues unless you can frame it in the context of domestic jobs and domestic issues? And when we have the will to act internationally. Again, withdrawing from the world, a similar question. U.S. should go its own way. Unprecedented since the 1960s. U.S. should mind its own business. Again, unprecedented since the 1960s. So we're fighting an isolationist trend that, again, unless you can really portray where this is going and how this fits into domestic needs, it may be very powerful. And who will fill the gap? I think on trade, you've seen EU, China, others. On security, it's a bigger question as well. So overall, 2010, I think, is going to be critical for the alliance recovery U.S.-ROK relationship. Whether we're going to be back going off that cliff again, with financial regulations and others. 20 will be remembered as the year we addressed the crisis, or we just kind of like like in the wake of World War I, did some kind of window dressing, League of Nations, and didn't really address the core problems that are still going on the financial side. G20, U.S. and Korea being the center of the world stage again. KORUS is going to put the trade agenda of the United States under the microscope, and whether we're ready to lead. Leadership is going to be essential, showing trade is key to openness and prosperity. APEC, G20, and again, the U.S. either needs to reassert a strategy or watch Asia move on until we develop that strategy. Because there are many from the East Asia community talk to other pieces that are out there. And just really quick in closing, I think these are always fun. This is the world that's proportional. The countries are proportional to the size of the data that's examined. So this is population in 1960. But then you go to GDP in 1960, you can see why you could have a G8 that could set a lot of the world economic policies with all with the U.S., EU, and Japan. But then you jump to 2015, and obviously you see the trend towards Asia and why so much of our future is dependent on building this tie. Korea is right in the center of that. And if we have such a strong ally, we can't find a way forward, and we're going to be thrust on the world stage of APEC and G20. I mean, where do we go? I mean, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. So I think that building and not setting up the administration, but trying to work this year to get ideas out there, ways we can find forward. Ways I do think, like Ed said, we do need a new trade strategy. I mean, it was not just stuck in partisans will attack the Obama administration and say we should just adopt the